Okay, so good day everyone. I hope you're all well right now at your homes. You're listening to this lesson. So, again, good day everyone. My name is Marian Luisical Bartosa, a Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in English. So I hope that you really listen into this discussion because this discussion is really wonderful and I know that it can really strengthen up your mind. So now let us discuss our new topic for today. So, what are we going to discuss right now is a story or is a novel of of Charlotte Bronte entitled Jane Eyre. Are you curious about this story? Okay, so before we're going to dig down about the story, let us know first who is really Charlotte Bronte. Are you ready? Okay. Okay, so let us start with this one. That Charlotte Bronte, often referred to us as Charlotte Nichols, was an English writer and a poet. She was the oldest of the three Bronte sisters who reached adulthood and whose literary works are now considered as classics of English literature. Her famous novel is A Jane Eyre, which she originally released using the male pen name Currer Bell. So that literature is what we are going to discuss right now, which is the Jane Eyre. So as we can see here in the PowerPoint presentation, there is Charlotte Bronte uses the male pen name, which is the Currer Bell. So, what do you think is the reason behind why women in this time really uses male pen name when in fact they can use their own name or they can have a female pen name because they are women after all. They're women after all, rather. So the reason behind of that one, as what I've remembered in my literature class way back when I was in third year college, the reason is what was I mean the author before the female author before are really afraid were really afraid to write their female pen name because they are they are really discriminated by the people. So basically, women are really treated as low class. So if they're going to use the female pen name, most likely they will get cancelled by the society. So to hide from it, to run from the ridiculous treatment of women in the society, these authors uses male pen name. So that is really sad reality. So now we have another information by Charlotte Bronte. First, she is really influenced by William Shakespeare. I know you're all familiar with William Shakespeare because we discussed some of his story way back when we were in our junior high school. So basically, as what I remembered, we discussed about the Romeo and Juliet, the Macbeth, and also the sonnet when we were in our younger years. So the reason behind that why Charlotte Bronte really likes William Shakespeare is first because of the emotional depth, moral complexity, and rich language in his works. His themes such as love, justice, suffering, and identity resonate deeply with Jane's own experience and inner life, reflecting her intelligence, sensitivity, and love for the literature. And one of that one, her famous novel is The Jane Eyre, which is I am going to discuss later on. The next one is she was really prominent figure in Victorian era because she really explores about the female independence and the social criticism through her characters. So the reason behind of that one is to really highlight the women's struggles for independence and self-worth because during that era or the Victorian era, women were really expected to be submissive and had limited rights and opportunities. So by having his work, it really gives a significant contribution towards the feminist literary movement, and it served as the people wake up call to really voice out, especially for women, voice out their rights. So that's it for Charlotte Bronte. So now let us welcome with the characters of the story Jane Eyre. So first we have Jane Eyre, the protagonist and of course the narrator of the story. Next one we have Edward Rochester. It's Jane's employer and love interest. So let us find out how does their story unfold. Next is Mrs. Reed, Jane's cruel aunt. John Reed, Mrs. Reed, abusive son. Eliza Reed, Mrs. Reed, cold and religious daughter. Georgiana Reed, Mrs. Reed's beautiful but shallow daughter, and we have Helen Bourne's Jane's kind and pious friend at Lowood. Okay, now for the next one, we have Mr. Brocklehurst, harsh headmaster of Lowood School. The next one is Mrs. Fairfax, the housekeeper of Thornfield Hall. Then Adele Varens, the Rochester ward, a lively French girl. Next is Bertha Mason, Rochester's secret mentally ill wife. St. John Rivers, a clergyman who helps Jane and later proposes to her. So, and for the last one, we have Blanche Ingram, a proud woman who hopes to marry Rochester. So, now let us now dig down what is the story all about? Before we dig down, sorry for that one, before we dig down with the story, let us first identify or know where is the settings or what is the point of view of the story. So are you familiar what is the settings? So settings is basically the time and the place of the story or of the story of course. So the settings is in 19th century England. So that happened during the Victorian era and it is in the 19th century, including Jane's childhood home at Gateshead Hall. So basically that is the childhood home or place of Jane. Next is we have the Lowood School. So this is the harsh Lowood School wherein Jane went to or studied. Then we have the mysterious Thornfield Hall where she works. Then we have the rural Moor House where she finds family, and Ferdinand, which is the Rochester secluded estate. So that is the settings of the story. So there are a lot and a various of location of the story. Next is we have the point of view of the story. So the point of view of the story is in first person narration from Jane Eyre's perspective. So basically, it is in the first point of view. First person point of view. So the story started as Jane Eyre as an orphan who lived at the Gateshead Hall. So she was later adopted by the Reed family. So the Reed family, or basically Mrs. Reed as a head of the family, she is really a cruel and a wealthy aunt. A servant named Bessie provides Jane with some of the few kindness she receives, telling her stories and singing songs to her. So basically, Jane only received love towards the servant who is Bessie. And one time when Jane and John is fighting, they are really fighting with each other, and John is deeply hurt. Her aunt imprisoned Jane in a red room. So this red room, this is the place wherein Uncle Reed died. So this is the uncle of Jane. And while Jane is locked in inside the red room, she started believing that she saw a ghost, and that ghost really scares her. So she screams and fainted. When she wake up, she finds herself with Bessie's care and with Mr. Lloyd. So Mr. Lloyd is the one who took care, good care with Jane during that moment. And with that one, Mr. Lloyd suggested to Mrs. Reed to let Jane go to school. So in Jane's delight, she was able to go to school, went to school, I mean to Lowood School. However, she really thought that that school will be her escape, but it is really far from reality, far from fantasy, because reality hits her and the headmaster is really cruel and abusive towards to the school or towards to her specifically, which is Mr. Brocklehurst. So with that mistreatment, luckily she met Helen Burns and received kindness from Miss Temple. So these early experiences really shape her moral strength and desire for being independent. So at the young age, she really experienced a terrible life. So with that one, after completing her education, Jane became a governess of Thornfield Hall, where she taught a young French girl named Adele. There she met her employer, which is Edward Rochester, and they gradually fell in love. During her time at the Thornfield, she witnessed strange events, including eerie laughter and a fire in a Rochester room, hinting at a hidden secret within the house. So this is the moment wherein she started working at the Thorns field, and he met, who is the person that he met Edward Rochester. So so with that one, she Jane finds herself falling secretly in love with Rochester. So at that moment where he stayed at the Thornfield, Jane really expect that Rochester will propose to Blanche. However, it is other way around. Rochester proposes to Jane, and this belief Jane received it. So this is the most thrilling moment of the story, because basically in the exposition and in the climax of the story, Jane is really suffering. So this is the moment of the wedding day. So on the day of her wedding to Rochester, so imagine, after all the suffering, it is her wedding day. So while they were about to exchange their vows, someone shouted at the door of the church. So imagine someone shouted, so you're really curious what is the goal of the person. So with that one, there is a voice of Mr. Mason. So Mr. Mason is the sister of Bertha Mason, who claimed that Bertha Mason is the wife of Rochester. So basically, Rochester is already married, and Bertha Mason was mentally ill and had been hidden in the attic. So, oh my god, if you were if you were Jane, imagine that you are in your beautiful dress, there's a lot of guests, you are really celebrating, and in the middle of that one, someone shouted that, okay, your man is already married. So that is really so sad. So heartbroken and betrayed, Jane chose to leave Thornfield, refusing to compromise her integrity by staying with Rochester under those circumstances. So even if I am in that situation, I will definitely run and cry. That is so sad. So for the following action, penniless and hungry, Jane is forced to sleep outdoors and beg for food. At last, there are three siblings who live in a manor, alternately called as a marsh end, and Moor House, take her in. So the names of this sibling is Mary, Diana, and Saint John. So basically in the story, Saint John is pronounced as Saint Jean, but let us pronounce it as Saint John. And these three siblings become easily friends with Jane, so they get along. And Saint John, a clergyman, really find something good towards Jane. So what he did, he finds Jane a job teaching at a charity school in Morton. He surprises her one day by declaring that her uncle John Eyre has died and left her a large fortune, so there's a lot of money. So basically, after all, Jane is a rich person. When Jane asks how he received this news, he shocks her father by declaring that her uncle was also his uncle. So basically, Jane and the Riverseas are cousins. Jane immediately decided to share her inheritance equally with her three newfound relatives. So with that one, Saint John decided to travel to India as a missionary, and he urges Jane to accompany him as his wife. So basically, Saint John proposes towards to Jane. Saint John even pressures her to reconsider, and she nearly gives in. However, she realizes that she cannot abandon forever the man she truly loves. When one night she hears, she only imagined that Rochester is calling her name over the moors. So this is so weird because basically us Filipinos or us in our generation, we cannot really marry our cousin. But in this story, it's basically telling that what? What do you think? Saint John is asking Jane to marry her. To marry him, I mean. So it is really a weird story. However, that is how the society works way back in the Victorian era. Now, at the last part of the story, as you notice, she, she said here that one night she believed she heard Rochester's voice calling her and decided to return to him. So after all, even after all the betrayal, Jane still loved Rochester. Okay, now we are down to the last part of the story, or the resolution, or the denouement part of the story. So immediately after Jane feel or felt that someone is calling her, or Rochester were calling her, she immediately returned to Thornfield. She found that the estate is burned down, and that is the reason why Rochester is blinded and at the same time injured from the fire. He lost one of his hands. However, despite of that one, Jane still travels on the Rochester's new residence, which is the Ferdin, where he lives with two servants named John and Mary. At Ferdin, Rochester and Jane rebuild the relationship, so there is really a comeback of the relationship, and they marry soon. At the end of her story, Jane writes that she has been married for 10 blissful years and that she and Rochester enjoy perfect equality in their life together. She also said there in the story that after 2 years of blindness, Rochester, thankfully in God's grace, was able to regain one sight of his eye and was able to behold their first son at his birth. So basically, they live happily ever after. So now I hope that you really enjoy the story. If you have a question, don't hesitate to private message me on my Facebook account. So now let us discuss with the conflict of the story. So first we have Jane versus the society, because the reason struggles as a poor orphan woman in a class-conscious world. So Jane really grows up as a poor orphan, facing cruelty and social prejudice at the Gateshead and the Lowood. Next is we have Jane versus Self, battles between passion and morality. If you remember that she really loves Rochester deeply but must decide whether to stay with him after discovering that he is already married. This moment really tests her morality over her passion or love. Next, we have our conflict, which is Jane versus Rochester. It really struggles with feeling. Jane really struggles with her feelings of betrayal and heartbreak when she learns that about Bertha Mason. Now, what is the tone of the story? So, basically, the tone of the story is reflective, serious, passionate, and often gothic. So, Charlotte Bronte's serious and reflective tone really help us understand Jane's inner struggles and the dark gothic atmosphere of the Thornfield Hall. Now we have the mood. Basically, the mood is dark, mysterious, emotional, romantic, and there are times also a hopeful events because the story's dark and mysterious mood matches the secrets of the Thornfield, while the romantic and hopeful moments reflect Jane's resilience and and eventful happiness of her life. So, let's move on with the theme and the moral lesson of the story. I hope you are really enjoying with this discussion. Now we are down with the theme and the moral lesson, which is first we have the theme, the love and the independence, and next is the gender and the social class. So Jane's journey shows how love and independence can coexist. She seeks both deep connection and the freedom to live by her own values. Next is the novel also critiques rigid gender roles and class division that limits people's choices, especially when it comes to women. So that is a theme all about the story of Charlotte. Next is the moral lesson. The moral lesson of the Jane Eyre is that staying true to one's principle and self-respect, even in the face of hardship or temptation, ultimately leads to personal growth, inner peace, and genuine happiness. So, as you remember, Jane really choose morality over passion or love. Over love, passion. She really choose to stay with her morals, especially she knows about her self-worth. So I can relate with this somehow about the moral lesson because there are times wherein I am really blinded with a person, of course, and sometimes I can really do things that is beyond my morality. So it's like this story is like a wake up call to me. It is really very important to know your self-worth as a person. So that would be all for our discussion for today. I hope that you really learned a lot. And if you have a question, just like what I've said earlier, just DM me. So goodbye, and I hope that you learn. This is Marian Luisico Partosa signing off.